Hello. In my short talk today, I will analyze the coronavirus emergency with the tool of sociological system theory. Mostly because it is a theory of society and there are not many nowadays. Even if in the COVID-19 crisis, the reference to society seems to become unavoidable. On the one hand, the condition of social isolation made most of us aware of the value of sociality, so the sociality that we now tend to lack. But society is not only sociality, as we perceive precisely when we must minimize physical social contacts. If anything, society is what makes it possible to revive sociality, even shifting social interaction to the virtual dimension of Zoom meetings, web aperitivi, conference calls, and so on. Physical distances does not necessarily mean social distance. And society in this case is often perceived as interconnectedness. The COVID threat affects the entire world, from Hubei to Italy to New York to Rwanda, all sectors of society and each of us. The virus is a threat to people's lives, but also to the stability of institutions, to the soundness of finance, to interpersonal relations, democracy, to the maintenance of jobs, to international links, and many other things. And then the most common response to this threat is a general call for harmonization. The idea that if everything is connected with everything else, we should move together and steer the intervention in different places in a coordinated way, following the same approach and the same basic principles. The idea is that only this way intervention can be effective and can avoid hindering each other. By going all in the same direction, we reinforce each other and proceed more quickly and effectively. This reference to unit of coordination is well known in sociology and has been discussed since many years as integration, which is a classical concept of sociology since Durkheim. Integration refers to what holds society together and implies a widespread sense of belonging that produces the impression that there is also a relation to other parts of society or to other people, so the reference to the shared unity. And integration in this sense has a positive connotation. The idea is that society should be as integrated as possible, avoiding thereby risk of enemy and difficulties in coordination. But experience, especially in the case of emergency, like the emergency we are facing now, shows that this call for integration and for harmonization is or risks to be unrealistic in complex societies as our society. The main obstacle is the increasing differentiation of society. Already in the 19th century, Durkheim identified the division of labor as the main challenge. How can a shared feeling of communality be preserved when everybody is different and does different things? System theory goes a step forward and talks of functional differentiation as a basic feature of modern society. Functional differentiation refers to the articulation of society into different areas or partial systems, each directed to a specific function: the economy, politics, the law, science, medicine, education, art, religion, the mass media, families, basically some other possible functional subsystems. The point that in previous hierarchy organized society, not functionally organized, the different fields share the same basic principles, while in modern society each subsystem, each functional subsystem, is guided by its own logic, by its own criteria, which are not necessarily coordinated with the ones of other systems and cannot be traced back to a single order. The progress and priority of the economy, for example, are different from those of science, of politics, of religion, of any other field. And success in one field does not by itself translate into a positive result in a different field. Whereas the economy is driven by profit maximization, politics seeks consensus and research is directed towards the production of scientific truth. How can there be an harmonization? Facing the pandemic, differentiation leads to different responses in different areas and seems to prevent coordination. We know that Medicine requires people to be tested to see who's sick and has to stay in isolation, while the economy claims to do tests, but to see who's immune and can go to work. Or restricting people's freedom and tracing their movement is effective in countering the spread of the virus, but it goes against the principle of the rule of law and against the guarantees of the Constitution. We know the debate everywhere in the last years now. Reducing taxes can help companies overcome the crisis, but taxes at the same time are used to support research and equipment for hospitals. Or science needs time to develop and test treatments or vaccines, but policy is in a hurry to give the immediate answers. So in the emergency, one would like harmonization, but each area tends to go its own way. How can our society find the coordination under these conditions? Here I refer to Luhmann's theories, and Luhmann's proposal is to understand integration in a different way, not as harmony, but as, he says, a little provocatory, in a provocatory way, as a kind of annoyance. In his definition, integration is, I quote, a reduction of the degrees of freedom, end of quote, which is due to belonging to society. The problem of a functional differentiation society in this view is not lack of integration, but rather too much integration, and that can be very dangerous. In functional subsystem, integration is perceived as mutual constraint. I quote Luhmann again, integration lies not in the relationships of the parts to the whole, but in the movable, even historically movable, adjustment of the subsystem in relation to each other. End of quote. So every system must give up possibilities because of the bindings with other fields of society. For example, science never has all the money it needs, and not all possible research is allowed by law or by religion. Politics is bound by the Constitution, by budgetary limits or even by media observation. And these limitations, in Luhmann terminology, annoyances we could say, are at the same time necessary to continue to exist in the society of which each system is part. So integration in this sense is neither good nor bad. It is simply a fact of the existence in a complex society with partial systems. And increasing integration cannot be the goal. It is necessary, but can become a burden, precisely because of functional differentiation. Functional differentiation involves what Luhmann calls a simultaneous increase of mutual dependencies and independencies. So this means that all fields of society are independent from each other because they must not follow the same principles. For example, the results of science must not be guided by religion, by the legal system. And the legal system must not follow the law of nature. The head of government is not chosen because he's noble or educated or rich or something else belonging to different criteria. So they are independent, but at the same time in our society the functional systems are more interdependent because each function can only be fulfilled in this specific system and all other systems must rely on it. So previous societies were less dependent from each other, from the different subsystems. They were in a sense more flexible because they had more redundancies. One could find, for example, the sacred text the answer to scientific or political juridical questions, which in turn were expected to confirm each other. But now the situation is different because the problems of one sector of society cannot be solved anywhere else. If scientific research does not produce the results that are needed, they cannot be imposed by law. Politics does not have the tools to produce wealth, and if it prints to say more money, it has to deal with inflation problems. Or think about the experience of Michael Bloomberg in the last US presidential elections. Wealth in itself does not imply consensus, political consensus, even if of course it helps. Or a high level of education does not guarantee the success of a marriage, and many other simple examples we can figure out. There's this mutual independence and interdependence, which can produce problems, but when all goes well, this mutual dependence on the autonomies of other subsystems can go unnoticed. When there are problems, however, this stands out. like in the emergency, like in our present emergency. If there's a high failure rate in one area of society, all other subsystems are forced to make serious adjustment. So the troubled sector becomes, so to say, dominant. And paradoxically, the dominant position is not occupied by the area that works better, by the area that is stronger, but rather the opposite, by the area that has problems. And this is what we experience today, what we experienced in the last couple of years. And this is the reason why Luhmann warned against excess of integration. I quote him again, "Modern society is over-integrated and therefore endangered." End of quote. So the calls for human unity and harmonization that we very often hear nowadays would not solve the problem, but make the problems rather worse. Luhmann's suggestion is to look not for integration, but rather for de-integration. The opportunities for rationality of society in dealing with the problems that come from the environment, he argues, lie, I quote again, in the maintenance and exploitation of differences, not in their elimination. End of quote. But what does it mean concretely, and specifically, what does it mean in our emergency? The different subsystems must react to the same event, COVID. But each of them should be able to independently determine the consequences of the irritation and able to learn in a different way. Think, for example, about the relationship between science and politics. Under the pressure of the emergency, politics relies on experts, which means on the performance of science. In most countries, in the most acute times of the COVID crisis, there were daily government press conferences that were held or guided by the epidemiologists, by scientists, who explained the situation, provide information about the medical emergency. But if you think about it, the task of scientists is not to produce certainty and operational indication, not to guide politics, but rather to generate uncertainty, the uncertainty that drives research forward. Luhmann defines experts as specialists to whom one can put questions that he is unable to answer, so produce uncertainty. And this is what experts now claim also. All virologists claimed that they are not the ones who must determine if and when to reopen cities and how to monitor people's movement. It is up to politics to decide, and they have to decide according to democratic procedures of representation and attribution or withdrawal of consent. Scientific irritation must be formulated and received in a way that favors, not paralyzes, the decision-making capacity of politicians, that allows politics to be independent, even if it becomes more and more dependent on science. But on the other hand, the relation can be seen in a different way, in the opposite way. In the emergency, politics seems to direct research and to dictate the focus of research. Political and economic pressure on science increased immensely, not only for the pursuit of a vaccine or for research on vaccines and to look for treatment of the disease or for epidemiological forecast, but also for the study of related economic, constitutional, psychological, educational aspects. There was a high pressure on science which restricted and still restricts the freedom of research, but does not overtake its procedures. Because despite this huge pressure, the timing and the constraint of scientific research cannot be much accelerated. The search for the vaccine required many months. The treatments always need testing and verification. So the increase in resources and in support should make it possible for science to develop its own procedures and unfold its autonomous potentialities, not restricted because it wouldn't be an advantage for any system nor for society as a whole.